Welcome to my podcast. My name is Pauli Liikala and I am from Finland. I have a special guest today, Ole Dammegard. Welcome, Ole.
Thank you so much, Pauli. I hope you're doing good.
Yes, you can tell a little bit about your background because people in Finland don't know you very well.
Well, I was born in Denmark. Then when I was a child, I grew up, we moved to Sweden and I grew up there with my with my family. And then at an early age, I started working as a journalist, and that got me into this area of questioning things. And then it was in 1980. That was the day when that really woke me up. It was the first time I saw a documentary about the JFK assassination. And in the so-called Zapruder film, where a bystander has filmed the assassination, you can see so very clearly that the final headshot throws Kennedy's head back and to the right, instead of what the official story was saying, that the shooter was behind him up and to on the sixth floor of the Texas School Book Depository, meaning that the official story was so clearly not true. And that was the thing that got me very, very confused for a long time, because I couldn't understand why these official big powers and documentary makers and Pulitzer Prize winning journalists and news channels and whatever, everybody was backing this story that it took like 22 seconds to understand. Since you can see him being hit like that, it's just normal physics. Somebody must have been standing to the front and to the right and fired at least the final headshot. So it was that thing that really got me going. And at that point, I had no idea that that would change my life. But since then, I've been spending some more than 40 years looking into many of the top political assassinations. I'm being considered one of the experts globally in some of the big cases, and also so-called false flag operations around the world. So I've been traveling to more than 50 countries. I've been interviewed more than 1,200 times, and I'm doing everything I can to make this world a better place by stopping this violence and this madness that is being pushed on the population in so many different countries.
Can you tell me more about President John F. Kennedy's assassination? You have looked into it very deeply.
I have looked into it very, very deeply. Like I said, it's 43 years of my life that I've put into JFK. It is the biggest one. And when you look at that, it is an absolute masterpiece of an ambush with the way they set it up. It is, well, what can I say? It's never been done again in the same level. It's so multi-layered with so many different shooters, so many different teams, so many working together without understanding it. Most of the people that were there taking part of this operation didn't even know about the other people. That it was completely what is called compartmentalized on what is also called a need-to-know basis, meaning that I know my little part. I have no idea about your part. You know only your part. You don't know about my part, and so on, so on, so on. But together, without us understanding it, we've become part of a big machine. And this day, there was a multi-level, very, very cleverly orchestrated ambush with multiple shooters this day. Not one shooter, one crazy guy. The guy that was blamed for the whole thing, his name was Lee Harvey Oswald, was completely innocent. He had nothing to do with it. On the contrary, he was trying to stop the assassination because he was involved with the people, some of the people that were part of the assassination itself. But the background to this whole thing was massive, massive. Kennedy was extremely, extremely dangerous to many big powers. And so the powers behind and surrounding the assassination was an unholy alliance of the CIA, the mafia, the military-industrial complex, J. Edgar Hoover, Vice President Lyndon Johnson, Richard Nixon was also involved in this whole thing. Some very big oil billionaires. But also he was standing up, and he was in the process of crushing the CIA. He was in the process of withdrawing from the Vietnam War, making this, which was a drug war to the biggest extent, a multi-billion-dollar business of death and drugs, to withdraw out of the Vietnam before 65. He was going to take back the power, the financial power from the Federal Reserve, which is also like a monster on its own, take the power back and connect it with silver. He was also going to stop the nuclear power program for Israel, and he was just in so many different areas. He was upsetting a lot of people, like Lyndon Johnson, Vice President Lyndon Johnson, was just about to be taken to court to be facing the charges of 8 assassinations. That he had his own killer henchman, Mac Wallace, who had murdered these 8 people. One of them being Johnson's own sister. So he was just about to be taken to court when this happened. So he got off the hook there and became the president that followed Kennedy. You had J. Edgar Hoover, the head of the FBI. He was also going to be fired. Now instead, after the JFK assassination, he got in for life. He was there until the day he died. Seems like he was murdered as well. Then you had the head of the CIA. Kennedy fired Allen Dulles, the head of the CIA. Also, some very high-ranking CIA officials. That was absolutely unheard of. He fired them. He was doing incredible changes. He was making incredible changes, including putting his brother, Robert Kennedy, as the Attorney General, starting a witch hunt for tracking down and knocking out the mafia. And the mafia had helped Kennedy get into power through his father. So they felt very, very double-crossed and very, very upset and angry with him, especially the Chicago mob, but also down in Louisiana with Carlos Marcello and so on. So there were a lot of people that were so pissed off and wanted him dead before the elections of 1964.
Can you tell more details about that assassination? Who was the people behind it? And the shooters also.
Yeah, like I said, the people behind it was this very, very hard to really get a very super clear picture of who was behind it. But many of the people I just mentioned were involved in the background. Then you had different layers in the CIA. You had people like Cord Meyer, David Atlee Phillips, E. Howard Hunt, Ted Shackley, were high-level people in the CIA also that was directly involved in the assassination. And then they had put together a team of assassins, a mobile team that was had been used from the late 50s and onwards, that was called Operation 40 or Group 40. It consisted of mostly exiled Cubans, but also some CIA operatives, including one man called James Files, who is now somebody I'm in direct touch with and interviewing on a regular basis. And he is the guy that fired the final headshot, the thing that just made Kennedy's head explode. So it's quite ironic that 43 years ago, it was the shot that came from behind the so-called picket fence on the grassy knoll that came from the wrong direction. That was the thing that got me started and changed my life forever. And now, after all of these years, I'm in direct contact with the guy who fired that shot. And so it's a very, very strange experience because he has also been one of a small little group of people that have been so central in so many different, very dark and very violent events in the world. So I see him as an extremely important whistleblower. Now he's 81. His health is not well. He's not doing good. But so I see it as extremely important to try and get as much information from him while he's still alive.
people thought a lot about that the real shooter were behind the picket fence. How did they manage to look after and make Lee Harvey Oswald as a patsy, as he itself said?
Oh, it's a super complex case, so it's not so easy to Lee Harvey Oswald was the guy that was being set up as a so-called patsy, the one that they wanted to blame it on. He was a CIA operative, also working for the FBI, but perfect because he had been on a mission to Russia earlier on in the early 60s. So he went there on a mission for the CIA, came back with a Russian wife. This was during the Cold War, so when people were very, very suspicious of the Russians and people from the Eastern Bloc, so that was the thing that made him perfect for the CIA to create as a patsy, because with that background, he would be perfect to blame it on. So they started preparing him about a year before the assassination by getting him to do stuff that made him look really like pro-Russian, pro-communist. And so he was, for instance, down in New Orleans handing out leaflets pro-Cuba. He was being interviewed on local TV as well in New Orleans, also where he would stand up saying that I'm a communist and all of these things. So they were preparing him, painting him perfectly black for the day when he was going to be blamed for it. But in the background, there was this coalition of different teams that on the date, the hit was planned first for Chicago, then in Miami, and then Dallas. Chicago, the Chicago mob turned it down because it was that, like they said, it was too close to home. It was it caused too many problems for the mafia. So Tony Accardo, who was the head of the CIA, of the Chicago mob, he and Sam Giancana was in communication with a guy called Johnny Rosselli, who was the go-between between the mob, the Chicago mob, Hollywood, and the CIA. He was sort of the guy in between. And they said, we can't do it in Chicago. It would just cause too many problems for us here. They then tried to do it in Miami. There were big plans on doing it there, but that was canceled as well. So the third possibility was down in Dallas, and that is where they carried it out. But it's a highly, highly sophisticated operation on so many different levels, because not only did they shoot him, but before that, all of the preparations, all of the security, all of that was withdrawn away from it. It was going the exact opposite of what would be normal in a case like when the president arrived somewhere. So, for instance, in a normal case, you would have there would be different military units that would go on location before to whatever city, check out the route, check out all the windows, the high-rising buildings, possibilities of shooters here, there, whatever. Also the route or the route itself, so that there would be no stops, so that there would be no slowdowns that could cause a danger because of the slowing down of the motorcade. Normally, also, the president's limo would be placed in the middle with lots of cars before, lots of cars behind. There would be a doctor very, very close, his personal doctor. There would also be an ambulance very close to the limo. There would be Secret Service guys on the side of the car, on the back of the car. There would be motorcycle police officers surrounding the limo as well. But here, what we saw here instead was that, first of all, they managed to get the bubble top off the limo so that there was no bulletproof protection for him. And then they put the limousine up as the second car in the whole motorcade. And then they pulled back the motorbikes so that they were behind him. And then they got the Secret Service agents to stand on the car following the follow-up car behind the president, meaning that he was left completely without protection. And then they changed the motorcade route route, so that when it came to Dealey Plaza, where the assassination happened, is a very peculiar designed open area. It's like it was where the first Freemasonic lodge were in Dallas. There's even an obelisk, and it's constructed exactly like a pyramid like this. So they were going from the Love Field Airport, and then they were going down Main Street, which is sort of like in the center of the pyramid like this, going in under the triple underpass, the bridge that were there, going down to Stemmons Freeway towards the World Trade Center, where he was going to give a speech. So the normal route, this was at the very end of the whole motorcade. So there were all of the thousands of people were before this. That people were starting to thin out. There were very few at the very end before they were going to go out on the highway. And this is exactly where, instead of the motorcade going down Main Street, so it could just keep the speed and continue with no problems, they made this unheard of turn to the right on what is called Houston Street, which is this street going like that. You have Commerce Street here, Elm Street, and Main Street, Houston Street here. So they first made a 90-degree turn, which is okay because you can still keep the speed. But then after that, they made a 120-degree to the left, which is breaking all security rules, all protocols. And that was where they slowed the whole thing down, so the limo came almost to a stop, and that is where, on Elm Street, where the shooting took place. And here the official narrative was that there was one shooter, Lee Harvey Oswald, up on the 6th floor, and where he fired 3 shots within 5.6 seconds with an old, horrible Italian rifle called Manlica Carcano, where he was shooting from a point where it makes absolutely no sense. There was a big tree in between. It was moving away from him. He could not have fired these 3 shots with the speed that we were being told. But instead, what we see, once you start looking into it, is that he was completely surrounded by shooters all over the place in every single angle, where I believe that many of the shooters did not fire any shot. They were only there to make sure that Kennedy got hit, and everybody was focused on a headshot. That was the main thing, a headshot. But the shots needed to come from behind, the same direction as Lee Harvey Oswald was said to have been. So several of the shots came from the so-called Daltex building, which is opposite the Texas School Book Depository, opposite on Houston Street here, down from the 2nd floor, very down in the same level as the car, because it goes downwards. The street goes slightly downwards, meaning that it's a perfect angle, because then when the car is moving away from you, if you are at that angle, you cannot miss, because it's not like in sideways. If you have a moving target sideways, this was just perfect. So around Dealey Plaza, we have all of these assassins that were placed out there. I don't know if you want me to go into the different names and who was doing what, and
you can tell me about the magic bullet and Warren Commission.
Okay, so the magic bullet was afterwards. They could not. They needed to blame all of these different wounds. First, Kennedy was hit in the throat. Then he was hit in the back. Then he was hit in the back of the head, but from behind, but also from the front, and possibly also from down below, at the very same time, making his whole head just explode. There was a massive big hole on the back of his head, with the entrance point right here. So after this whole thing happened, the official investigation that was put there as to cover the whole thing up, they were not trying to find the truth. They were trying to cover it up. So they appointed their own investigation, and also they appointed what is called the Warren Commission that should look into this whole thing. And so with all of the different bullet holes in the car and in the window. Also, there was one bystander that was hit in the face by a ricochet. And so they needed to account for all of these different wounds, because also there was Governor Connolly, John Connolly, was sitting in front of JFK, and he was hit as well. He was hit here under the armpit. The bullet came out in his chest, but he was also hit here, and he had a bullet lodged in his leg. So it's like there were a lot of different bullet holes and angles and stuff like that. And the problem was it needed to be blamed on 3 shots, because that was the 3 empty shells that were left up at what is called the sniper's nest. So in the Warren Commission, there was a young guy who later was trying to run for president. His name was Arlen Specter. He came up with the idea of the so-called magic bullet, that this bullet, one bullet of these, because you had you had the final headshot, boom, that was one. Then you had one bullet that missed the president but hit the bystander in the face, the ricochet. So that was 2. So all of the rest of the injuries, they had to blame on one bullet, and that was what has become very famous, being called the magic bullet, because this bullet is said to hit Kennedy in the back, then change the angle up, going upwards, coming out here, then stopping midair, turning right, going right, then turning left, waiting, I think for half a second or a second or something, then slamming into the armpit of John Connolly, coming out of his chest, going into his hand, turning around, and then lodging itself in the leg of John Connolly. And then at the hospital, falling out, completely pristine, not a dent, I mean, perfect, mint condition, falling out, and was found on a stretcher or on the floor at the Parkland Hospital. And this is, to this very day, the official narrative that, yeah, that shot was the one that like that. I mean, there has been no bullet in world history that has ever been able to do anything like that. But that is what we've been told, and many people to this very day still believe it. It's absolute bullshit. But I can tell you about James Files, because he is a very, very interesting part of this whole thing, if you want that.
Yes.
Okay, so James Files is a very, very interesting person, because he was born into a program of assassins. His mother was very poor. She was living down in Mobile, Alabama, and she didn't have a job, so she signed up for a program where she was paid to be inseminated in a program to sort of like a US military program to create super soldiers. They were using some of the German scientists from Operation Paperclip, which was already started to be exported from Nazi Germany into the West. And so James Files, he was born under the name of James Sutton. And when he got born, he was right away taken under control by these scientists. So he didn't have a normal life at all. According to the official papers, he died at birth. But instead, he never went to normal school. He never went to high school. All he ever learned was to kill. That was it. He was trained to kill already from the age of 6, 7, 8. He was being trained in all different ways of killing. And this goes for 2 other shooters that was in the JFK assassination. They were also brought up as children into becoming assassins. All 3 of the people I'm talking about has killed at least 1,000 people. So these are heavyweight in this world. And so James Files was, when he was 17, he signed up for the military. He wanted to go to Vietnam, and he was sent first to the Philippines and then redirected into Laos, where he was very young. He was only, like I said, 17, but he was an experienced killer really at that early age. I think he had 18 kills before he turned 18. And in Laos, he was part of an operation called the Mobile White Star, where for some reason he executed 2 of his own men. And because of that, he was sent back to the US to face court-martial. But it was at the veteran hospital where he was staying after he had been sent back to the US. That is where the CIA, through a man called David Atlee Phillips, who became his controller, but who was also the controller of Lee Harvey Oswald. David Atlee Phillips was the one that recruited him into the CIA. He said, you know, this problem with these 2 people that you executed, these problems can go away. They can just disappear if you start working for us. So Files had no problem with that at all. So he was signed up by the CIA, and then from then on, he always had like what he was calling a traveling bag, so that he could be sent anywhere at any time. So every day he called into David Atlee Phillips, said, is there anything for me to do? And on the days where there were things to do, he was being sent right, left, and center to many different places around the world. But he was also, at the same time, he was headhunted by the Chicago mob. So because he was a very good shooter, a very good driver, and the Chicago mob got their eyes on him. So he started working together with a hitman from Chicago called Chucky Nicoletti. And so he was the driver and the bodyguard for Chucky Nicoletti at the age of 20. And yeah, so from very, very early on, he was in the business of killing people. That was it. He has been going through many different mind control programs as well, desensitizing him, just making him the perfect killer. And it was because of his connections both with the CIA and the Chicago mob that he was in Dallas that day. But he was not there as a shooter. He was there as a driver for Chucky Nicoletti. In July of 1963, Chucky Nicoletti looked him up and said, listen, we're going to Dallas. We're going to take out your friend. And James Files didn't really understand who he was talking about, but it turned out that it was Kennedy. And Files did not like Kennedy at all. He was actually hated him after the Bay of Pigs fiasco. But for him, killing was nothing, you know. So for him to take part of this assassination, he said it was like taking out the trash. No emotions. He couldn't care less. He just did a job. But as I said before, he was there only as a driver and a weapons bearer for Chucky Nicoletti. So he drove down 5 days before the assassination in a burgundy Chevy Impala that was loaded with weapons. This is only one of multiple cars that are coming into Dallas that day, bringing shooters, weapons, ammo, hand grenades, mines, you name it, all of it was being brought to Dallas this day. And so he came 5 days earlier. He stayed at a motel called the Lamplighter Inn. And while he was there, preparing for this whole thing, there was a knock on the door, and it turned out that Lee Harvey Oswald came because he had the same handler, like I mentioned before, David Atlee Phillips. And David Atlee Phillips had asked Oswald to go there and help Files with learning the location, you know, the roads, the one-way roads, the train crossings, everything like that, so that he could make a perfect getaway. Whatever happened, if something went wrong, he would know exactly where to go or not to go. And also during these days, he and Lee went outside of Dallas, outside Mesquite, and where Files was test shooting and calibrating the guns that was going to be prepared. So, but they didn't speak about the assassination. They didn't, like in the world of assassins, they never discuss anything with each other. They never talk about these things. They never ask questions, because if you start asking questions or if you start knowing too much, then you become a problem. and problems are very often solved very violently. So James Files knows nothing about the rest of this operation. But anyway, so he had brought a special gun just in case. It was called a Remington Fireball X100, and it's like a rifle, but with a pistol grip. So it's like a bolt-action rifle, but with a pistol grip. It's no longer, it's only like this. It's a caliber 221, meaning a very fine caliber, not heavy caliber at all, but it's super precise. And it was made by the CIA in the early 60s as a weapon for assassinations. So the CIA ordered 500, and also the FBI got 500 of these assassination weapons. And so Files had used this gun in two earlier hits before. So 2 other people got hit with that gun. But to prepare for this assassination, he went to the Chicago mob's weapon expert. This guy was called the Wolfman, and he asked for some special ammo. And so Wolfman, because this weapon had a tendency to ricochet off the skull of victims, and so he didn't want to risk that would happen. So he asked for a very explosive ammo. And so Wolfman helped him prepare. He drilled out 6 bullets. He drilled the top of the bullets and then filled them with mercury, and then added wax on top, meaning that when the impact occurred, the mercury would come from behind and make the whole thing just explode, which is exactly what we also see at the time of the shooting of the final headshot. So anyway, so Files was only there as a getaway driver and bringing the weapons. One thing that is important to mention is that the paymaster for this group, Operation 40 or Group 40, where many of the shooters that day came from this group, the paymaster for that group was George Bush Sr. as a young man. So George Bush Sr. was in Dallas as well. This day he was in the Daltex building, and right after the shots were fired, he was standing outside the Texas School Book Depository. So deeply involved in this whole thing. But then on the morning of the assassination, on the 22nd of November, Kennedy was flying in together with his wife from Fort Worth, and they were landing at the Love Field airport. It had been raining that morning. Had it continued raining, they would have kept the bubble top on, the bulletproof bubble top on, and the whole operation would have been canceled. But unfortunately for Kennedy, the sun broke out, and suddenly it was a really nice morning. But it was at that time also where Johnny Rosselli, the go-between that I mentioned before, that was also being planned as one of the shooters, he backed out because according to him, the CIA was talking about aborting the operation. So he backed out as a shooter. And it was at that point where Chucky Nicoletti asked Jim's Files, would you mind becoming my backup shooter? This was like only an hour and a half before the assassination. And Files said, I would be honored to, because he adored Chucky Nicoletti and he hated Kennedy. So Nicoletti asked him, where would you position yourself? And Files said, behind the picket fence, up on the grassy knoll. But his job was only there as a backup shooter, should Kennedy get away. So he was given the task, do not fire until absolutely necessary. And we're going for a headshot. So anyway, Files was fine with that. While he was standing there waiting, he was behind the picket fence. And while he was standing there, the one person approached him. And this was the ground coordinator, one of the ground coordinator for this. His name was General Edward Lansdale. And these are the 2 guys that are being observed, talking together some minutes before the assassination, where he was just checking up on all the different shooters, if they needed anything or whatever. And then what he did was once the motorcade came, he observed a lot of people in Dealey Plaza that he knew from before that were in the area of assassinations. This whole operation went under the name of the Big Event, because this was the hit of the century. So many people in this business of murder incorporated wanted to be there, or they were there. I don't know, many of them, we have no idea why they were there, if they were only there as bystanders or if there were different levels of conspiracies going on. Maybe had they failed in one way, they would activate another team or whatever the reason was. But many of the people there are well-known assassins. We have identified many of them. But anyway, so the motorcade comes around. James Files believes that it's only Chucky Nicoletti and himself that are the shooters. I completely disagree with him. There were multiple shooters. I identified most of them. But anyway, the motorcade comes around. And then when you can see on the so-called Zapruder film, when he comes, the limo is being filmed, they come and there's this street sign where it says Stemmons Freeway. And you can see right in the beginning, when suddenly Kennedy goes up like this, his hands goes up like that, and he's been hit right in the throat by something. If you look at the Zapruder movie, I'm the only one pointing this guy out, but I completely believe that the first shot were fired from a guy. If you look above the limo on the Zapruder movie, right when he goes up with it, don't look at Kennedy, look up above the limo. You will see that there's a guy quite heavily built in a khaki colored shirt and trousers and with a big bulletproof vest, massive big bulletproof vest, dark brown. And he's like in a shooting stance with a small little black gun, and he fires, and then you can see he just fires and let go of his hand. Very relaxed, very relaxed. With the distance is like maybe 2-3 meters, very, very short distance. And also the limo was coming very slow. His name is Walter Turbinski. I had the testimonial of his cousin's girlfriend where he was bragging about his part. There's also one photo of him afterwards where you can see when all the cars and when people are running towards the grassy knoll, the cars are moving towards the Parkman Hospital. Everybody's running that direction. One guy is walking very calmly across the street towards the Texas School Book Depository. Khaki colored clothes and a massive big bulletproof vest. Walter Turbinski. He's also the guy in the JFK movie. If you see when there was, they thought that Oswald had been at the Russian embassy in Mexico City, trying to get to Cuba. The guy that was being taken photos of when he left that embassy was Walter Turbinski. That's the guy. That is the guy. Same guy. Anyway, so when Files, he had a scope on this Remington Fireball, and so he was zooming in on Kennedy, and the only thing he focused on was a headshot. That was his instructions: headshot, headshot, headshot. Had Kennedy been hit in the head, he would not have fired. But instead, now he heard the shots being fired. 1, 2, 3. He didn't count the shots. He counted them as miss, 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 miss. And then at the very last second, before the limo would take off and go off to Parkland, instead of what it would normally do in a situation like this, would be that the driver would just step on it and speed out of the situation, like high speed towards the hospital. Here we see the exact opposite, where the driver slows down and almost come to a full stop. Anyway, at that time, Files is completely zoomed in on Kennedy's face. He's aiming at his right eye. And then since nobody has hit him in the head, he decides to fire. He says that right the millisecond before he fired, the Kennedy's head was thrown forward by a hit from the behind. And so instead of hitting him in the eye, he hit him right here. So his whole head explodes. But what the files did after that was that he he had a jacket on that it was like a silver type material colored jacket that he could turn inside out. It was like you could use it both ways. And when he turned it on the other side around, it was like a red checkered thing. It almost looked like a forest worker or somebody like that. So he changed his clothes. He bent down. He put the fireball into a little briefcase. He took the empty shell and tasted the gunpowder. It was a thing that he always did after when he had killed somebody. And then he bit down on it and put it on the fence, the picket fence. He was so cocky. He at that time, he said they felt like gods. They felt that they were invincible and nobody could get to them. So very, very careless. He put it there as sort of like almost like a souvenir or like a signature marking. And then when he bent down, he put down the gun into the case, put on a hat, turned the jacket inside out, and then he just started walking very, very calmly towards the Texas School Book Depository. He came in front of that, saw George Bush Sr. there, that they knew each other well. And then he got over to the Deltex building where he had parked the car, where Chucky Nicoletti and Johnny Rosselli, who had been inside the Deltex building, firing the shots from there, together with a spotter called Tony Izquierdo, they were already in the escape car. So James just got into the car and then very quickly and calmly drove off Houston Street North, turned left a little bit further up then, and then dropped them off at a gas station. And never a word was said, nothing. Just that Nicoletti said, it felt like you got a bit carried away there, didn't you? And I tell you, I completely agree with Nicoletti, because it is only because of files shot from the wrong direction. That is the thing that have caused all of the problems surrounding the JFK assassination. This is the cause for all of the cover-ups, because they had to somehow explain this thing that made Kennedy's head explode from the wrong direction. This is the thing that's why they had to hijack and steal or kidnap the body. That's why they had to do multiple autopsies, that how I mean, there's so many things that are based on that. And in the end, according to people in the CIA that I've been in touch with, Kennedy is not buried at the Arlington Cemetery. He was dumped out at sea. They just threw his body away in a concrete casket with big holes in it, and just sank it out there, not far from the Kennedys' holiday home. So, but to get rid of it so that they could get rid of all the evidence as well, because his head was filled with mercury after that final shot. So it's very interesting for me to now be in direct touch with this man who was actually the one who fired the shot that got me started so many years ago. And I tell you, Pauli, it was him who contacted me in 2016 or 17. One day, he had been in jail for many in prison for many years, and without any, I mean, I didn't think they would ever gonna release him. He was in prison for having shot a police officer, anyway, so somehow he got out. And then I got a friend's request on Facebook from a guy called David Armstrong. And so I just checked it out, you know, before, because I have been one of the speakers in Dallas 3 times. I've been, you know, I'm well known in the JFK assassination, and I've been standing side by side with files, you know, really trying to do everything I can to support him in his truth getting out there, because I have not ever heard him lie about anything. Incredibly honest, this guy, very brutal. incredibly honest. And so, and many other researchers doubt him and speaks very badly about it. I don't get it. I do not understand it at all. But anyway, so I got this friend's request on Facebook, and he has a very specific, unusual face, and he had long white hair his whole life. And there were photos of him, but under the name of Damien Armstrong. And I was like, what the hell? So I wrote, is that you, Jimmy? And then I just got back, yes. And that was for me really like, whoa. So I started asking him questions about details, that nobody else would know about, to make sure that it was actually him. And he answered everything very precise and very correctly. And then in the end, I got $100 donation from him, which was very odd for me, because it was like, that is from the man who blew the head of JFK. That assassination was the first massive step in messing this world up to a level that, I mean, had JFK, Martin Luther King, Robert Kennedy be left alive, this world would have looked completely different. So very, very odd to stand by and support someone like that, even get a donation. I can't remember what I did with that. It's possible that I donated it somewhere else, or I don't know what we did with that, but very odd. I don't know. Maybe you can understand that. It was a very strange feeling for me.
Yes, I surely can. You have also investigated Olof Palmen's assassination. Would you tell more about that?
Oh, Pauli, you know how to. The assassination of Olof Palmen. Yes, since you are in Finland, many people would remember that assassination as well. It was in 1986. And, like I said before, I started in 1980 becoming extremely interested in these things. And at that time, I had no idea that there were any connections between these assassinations, like JFK, Robert Kennedy, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X. I had no idea, which I now know that they're completely connected. Many are carried out by the very same people. Within very few years, also, it was like bump, 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 bump. They hit them, all of the ones standing up, they just hit them. But it was in the early 80s where I spent thousands and thousands of hours reading everything I could get my hands on, and every documentary, everything about these assassinations, that I started to see that there was a very clear pattern of how to carry out a political assassination and get away with it by blaming a lone crazy guy, a lone patsy, but where it was actually a political assassination where they got rid of an opponent that often wanted to do good. And these dark forces wanted the dark stuff. So anyway, I started seeing more and more that it looked to me like they were using methods that was developed during the Roman Empire on how to create the illusion of a senseless murder when it was actually a political hit, and then blame it on somebody completely innocent and get away with it. So over these years, I started seeing a very clear pattern on JFK, Martin Luther King, Robert Kennedy, but also Malcolm X. Not so much how they were killed, but how they were being blamed on some lone individual. They always want them alone, because then by law, it's not a conspiracy. And then in legal terms, they don't have to deal with it like if it was a conspiracy. And then they want them crazy or fanatic, because then he was crazy. That means no need for a motive either. And if that person is then suicidal on location, then it's just case closed. Thank you so much. Go back to sleep and let's get on with our agenda. So every time you hear about a lone crazy guy, please, your ears should go like, what? Like that. So I started seeing that there was a very clear pattern on how also the investigations that were put there was put there not to find the truth. On the contrary, they were there to cover it up. And the investigations were instead aimed at people that were getting too curious, like this one. You know, people that started questioning, or people that started investigating, getting too close to the truth. Then the investigation had people that they used to silence these voices, sometimes very violently. Very scary, because, I mean, what on earth is that? So I started seeing very clearly that these were non-investigations, but backed from a very high level every single time. And also these investigations, if they were being criticized too much by normal people, and that these civilian voices wouldn't quiet down, then what would happen was that they would just appoint a commission. This commission would be mostly of Freemasons that was being controlled in the background, or were a part of these brotherhoods. And so this commission would then be part of the crime, just like the investigation as well. Be part of the crime, to cover it up, make it look really like we are really doing an incredible job. We're sitting here 1 year poking our nose, snorting coke, sometimes have prostitutes on the room, I think, but officially working very hard finding the truth. Not. And then they would have people in the background producing documents in the thousands that said absolutely nothing, but made a really nice pile of papers that would be impossible to really find anything of value in it. So that was the setup. So anyway, so in 1986, in February, on the 28th of February, the assassination of the Swedish Prime Minister Olof Palmen officially occurred in the streets of Stockholm. And at that time, I mean, I didn't like Olof Palmen at all. I thought he was an arrogant besserwisser, not a very nice person, but somebody that was almost having a two-faced personality. One, behind the scenes, arrogant, hard, also very sexual in many different areas, both women and men, sometimes underaged. But officially, he was the friend of the weak, of the poor, of the working class, that was his political, but that was not how he started. He started out right wing. His first job was in military intelligence, and then he got in. He comes from a very powerful family as well, the Palme family, very, very powerful, who were involved together with a family in Sweden also called Aschberg, and another Swedish family called Wallenberg. They were part of funding a lot of big events in the world, including the so-called Russian Revolution, where it wasn't a Russian revolution, it was a takeover, it was a destruction of the Tsar Empire and an overtake of bankers that took over. But they used people like Lenin and Trotsky and so on, who came to Stockholm first and was being supplied with everything they needed and funded, and then they were sent in. Anyway, so, and the Palme family very connected in very, very odd ways with the CIA, with the German intelligence, also it was relatives to Olof Palme that started the Communist Party in India, the Palme Dut. You had one of his uncles were in the at the war, what do you call it, the Nuremberg trial, where he worked for IG Farben, and so very odd. They had the director for the CIA in their home. They had Hermann Göring, the chief of the Luftwaffe, in their home. Also very odd, not just any ordinary family. And then, and right wing, very right wing. The rest of his family, very right wing. And then it came to a point where it said that he went to the US and he was hitchhiking around in the South and he saw all the poor people there. And so he thought, oh my God, I want to be a social democrat. And so he came home and overnight just changed, boom, boom, from right to left. And very young, he came into the politics, and he came under the wings of the Swedish Prime Minister Tage Erlander, who was very well liked, but also involved with NATO and CIA in the building up of what is called Stay Behind, the Gladio Network, a ghost army, a NATO ghost army, where the headquarters was in exactly the building from where Olof Palmen was killed, right outside. That was the headquarters where the director for the CIA, his name was William Colby. He was an ambassador at that time. He was part of building up Stay Behind in Sweden, in Denmark, in Norway. I don't know about Finland, but did it guarantee connected also in this whole thing? Because just because, well, I don't want to say about Finland for sure, but I know Sweden, Denmark, and Norway, very connected. My parents were involved in the Danish part of building up this ghost army. In Denmark, it was called Absalon. But anyway, so Olof Palme comes in as a very young politician, and then it's like I would suggest that he was like a Trojan horse. He was sent in because he was working for the banksters. He was connected to many of these big guys in the US also. He was connected with the CIA, possibly also with KGB. He has a very, very odd background. And then he comes in and takes over. And this is the Social Democrat Party that was in power for some 40 years in Sweden. This was not just a party, it was like a power structure. The whole of Sweden was built around this whole thing. But it is a super complex assassination. And if you want, I can just say it will sound completely crazy if people have not looked into this before. Normally, I do like a 5-6 hour presentation where I just first I show all of the things that are so weird, so strange, so completely crazy around this whole case. And then after 3 hours, I say, okay, now look at what I believe happened. And if you want to, I can go into that one, but that is a mind-blowing thing because he was actually part of ordering the assassination on himself.
Yes, I have looked at the film where you tell all the thing. I think people must see it later.
It would be great if maybe you can put the links underneath
Yes,
to these.
I sure will.
Because it's I can only say that I'm not just somebody that sits on the internet and likes and stuff like that. I go on location, and I spent when Palme was killed for the first 2-3 years. I mean, I lived in Sweden. I trusted the Swedish police. I thought there are no corruption here. Whatever the media says is true, and that the police would be doing their best. So I was sure that within a few years, a year or so, they would take the guy. And then this is where it got shocking to me, because then I started seeing the exact same pattern as with the other assassinations in the US, following the exact same template that I had found. I never found it on a paper, but I, just by comparing. So I could see exactly how they were doing it. Boom, 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 point 1, point 2, point 3, point 4. And so when this happened in Sweden, I decided to quit my job. And so I moved to Stockholm. I started working as a bus driver and a cleaner, just to be on location, to be in the middle of all of this, because it was a historical big event. And it was while I was there that I started seeing that it seemed like the exact same template was being used in Sweden. How is that possible? How, if it's not connected somehow, how, oh, how, oh, how. And so at one point, I could see, like with JFK, Martin Luther King, Robert Kennedy, they were doing like step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so in Sweden, I started seeing 1, 2, 3, 4. I was like, if what I suspect is true, that there's somehow some connecting force behind this, then the next step in Sweden would be step 5, whatever that 5 was. Took 2 weeks, boom, then that was exactly what happened. I mean, it absolutely blew my mind and shocked me to the core, because suddenly I understood that Sweden is not the country I thought I grew up in. Sweden is, I mean, it's connected with corruption on a very, very high and deep level to be part of that whole thing. So how on earth? And that's when I completely devoted myself to Palmen for some 12 years. And I got very, very deep in, and it got very scary. I had 2 friends who died. I was threatened myself. It got really ugly, really, really ugly. And it ended with me leaving Sweden. I took my sweetheart and her kids, and we left Sweden, boom, like that. And then we stayed in Spain for 20 years, started from absolute scratch, no money, no work, no job, no language, no nothing, but managed to get a life there. And then a few years ago, we had to do the same again, from Spain to Indonesia. So now I live in Indonesia, but we escaped from Spain during lockdown because it was getting really ugly there as well. And doing what I do, it is not without risks. So my family was very worried, and so we kidnapped my daughter against her will, and we managed to get out to Indonesia, and we've been living here since then.
Thank you, Ole. It has been very interesting to hear from you, and I have also read a lot about JFK assassination, and you have digged very deeply. I'm pleased that you told us all the details of this assassination. So I thank you.
Thank you so much, Pauli. And we just scratched on the surface. These are very, 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 very deep, multi-layered, super complex in the world of these intelligence operations, where white is black, black is white. It's all smoke and mirrors, upside down enigmas inside enigmas, inside labyrinths. It's a very, very complex road. I can show you, I've written one book. About the Palmen assassination is like this, boom. It's almost 1,000 pages, very, very detailed about the whole, what went down. And I'm in the process now also of writing a new book called Guilty Victim, where I tell what I believe, truly believe, is the truth of what happened. Because these 2 very thick books that I published in 2005 are a historical sort of like description of what happened, all of the weird things, I mean, it is so bizarre, that case. It is so bizarre. But there is a reason for all the lies. There is a reason for all the manipulations, for the cover-ups. Many people have died also. Many people have been silenced, suicided, died in weird traffic accidents in Sweden. I mean, shocking for me. It's shocking. Like I said, I even had 2 friends who was murdered. I mean, I did not think that happened in Sweden, but it sure did. And so the one that I call Guilty Victim, that is about what I truly believe actually happened. Multi-layered. It's an incredible story. I'm in the process. I've been talking to Gaia TV. I hope to be, I'm almost getting close to Netflix now. Netflix is not a platform that I trust, but at the same time, they are also interested. True crime is a big one for them. So if I can get them interested, I'm aiming at a 3-season series, completely to the truth, mind-blowing story. I tell you, I haven't had to do, like with fantasy or imagining anything. Just following the truth is the biggest murder investigation in the world. People are not aware of that. It's the most expensive murder investigation ever. More than 2 billion Swedish krona has gone straight into a big black hole, doing nothing except covering the whole thing up. So, yeah, but one day, I hope to get it made into a series. And I tell you, if I will insist on that they stick to the truth. And in that case, if they do that, it is unbelievable. But in that Guilty Victim, I've written it like a Dan Brown novel, like short chapters, because it's super complex. But at the same time, when you get it like that, then suddenly, boom, 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 boom. And one day the truth will get out there. And yeah. On my website, lightonconspiracies.com, conspiracies, plural, lightonconspiracies.com, I've got more than 1,200 on my interviews. In some of them, I point out the exact people involved, including in the Olof Palmen assassination. I named the guy who killed him, officially killed him. There's so much information on that website. There's more than 5,000 articles. There's podcasts, there's webinars, I tell you, you can stay there for 5 years, no problem, nonstop. And everything, as far as I've been able to find out, every single thing that is on there is true, as far as I've been able to see it. So I've really devoted my life to get the truth out there. And I'm very grateful to have been invited by you, Pauli, because Finland is an area where I've done some podcasts in Finland, but it's an area, I believe that because of the Finnish population not often being so good at English, that Finland is being left outside, just like the Germans also are being left outside. This type of information doesn't reach so easily into these countries. So I'm very grateful that you have opened a door here.
By the way, I have ordered those 2 books and I have studied many hours in your website. So it's very good that you are telling the truth. The world is changing, and it is good that people will tell the truth. And you are doing so much for all the humankind. I thank you for that.
Thank you so much, Paulo. Thank you for seeing what it is I'm trying to do. It's come at a very high price. I paid a very high price in the form of, like I said, with my dead friends, and I've been shot. I've been almost hit by cars. I've had death threats. It's a very, very brutal area to get into. But why are they trying to shut down the truth? It's because the truth is the only thing they fear. The people that carry these things out, that's the only thing they are afraid of. So it is through truth. The truth shall set you free, as they say in the Bible. And I completely agree. So transparency, that's the way forward. And come from the heart, not the mind. And let's create a beautiful future together.
These are very kind words, and we can just stop here and people will look at your website. I'm sure about that. But thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Pauli. And maybe you can also explain in Finnish and just give a easier access to the website.
Yes, I think many people will be in touch with me and I can explain these things in Finnish.
Super duper.
So Merry Christmas to you.
Merry Christmas to you. And let's make 2024 the best year ever, because it's time now. It's time to turn this around and then start celebrating and enjoy life.
I will do that.
Me too.
Bye-bye.